For the past 4 or 5 years, I can't remember how long, I have been the part-time collection expander for the African American Episcopal Historical Collection, otherwise known as a curator. It's been a privilege in every way. And so I'm very pleased that we had this morning and today's series of talks and discussions, and this afternoon with the great Bishop Baxter. This morning we will have a conversation between two people who are very much at home here at Virginia Seminary. And they will talk about John Walker. And I promise you that I will not speak the entire time. Although I'm tempted both. All the way to your right is the Reverend Lloyd Anthony Lewis, who holds the distinction of having been, in 1978, appointed the first African-American full-time faculty member here at VTS. And here he earned his Master of Divinity degree. After he completed his dissertation in 1991, he returned to VTS in 2000, where he then served as the Molly Laird Downs Professor of New Testament. Alexandria, Virginia has been his home from birth. He and his family were all members of Meade Memorial Episcopal Church, historically black Episcopal parish here in Old Town. Tony Lewis desegregated St. Stephen's School, right across the street, graduating in 1965. And he told me this morning that when he graduated in 1965, he was still the only black student to have attended there. He earned his baccalaureate degree in philosophy at the very fine Trinity College in Hartford. And after returning to Alexandria and here, he went on to graduate study at Yale, where he earned his Ph.D. in theology. His portrait hangs in the refectory, almost directly opposite the Bishop John T. Walker portrait. I like to think of their placement as bridging the wide span that is the great room, the refectory. And as we all know, the Right Reverend John Thomas Walker was beloved as an eminent member of the clergy and is held in highest regard here at VTS. And what I soon learned in moments when I stepped onto this campus, and what everybody on this campus has come to know, and they learned early and well, that this community adores Tony Lewis.
Yes.
Next is the Reverend Canon Preston Hannibal. Preston is retired as Associate for Pastoral Care at the Washington National Cathedral. He served for 14 years as the Canon for Academic Ministries in the Episcopal Diocese of Washington, which allowed him to nurture, he and his wife Sandy, to nurture the growth and development of the Bishop John T. Walker School for Boys. He was senior chaplain and chair of the religion department at St. Mark's School in Southborough, Massachusetts, and associate minister in the Memorial Church at Harvard, where he served alongside the late and wonderfully gifted Reverend Professor Peter G. Gomes. And Preston also presided at Peter Gomes' memorial service. When he was at the Memorial Church, Preston was also the chaplain to Harvard College. Later, he held the Charles Dickey Faculty Chair for Religion and Ethics at St. Paul's School, having succeeded Bishop John Walker. He has been in proximity to this campus when he was the interim chaplain at Episcopal High School. Preston has served on several boards of Episcopal schools and was given the Verdery Award for Distinguished Service to Episcopal Schools in the National Association of Episcopal Schools. He grew up in LA, and after college he went on to earn his MDiv degree at Bexley Hall, followed by graduate study at Ridley Hall and Fitzwilliam College at Cambridge. And he was a visiting scholar at Cambridge's St. Edmund's College. Thank you both for being here. Before we begin the discussion, I'm going to say a little bit more about Bishop Walker, if you don't mind. As we learned this morning, he found his spiritual home in the Episcopal Church while he was a student at Wayne State University in Detroit. It's 1947, 2 years after World War II ended. And in Detroit, he attended the Cathedral Church of St. Paul. And its social activism clearly intrigued him. After Wayne State, he found his way to the Old South that we call Alexandria. And this venerable institution of the Episcopal Church establishment, the Virginia Theological Seminary. And almost 75 years later, we still remember him as the first black student to have graduated from this institution. And it's a sobering thought to think that it is still an important distinction. Just a few years later, Tony Lewis in 1965, as I mentioned, desegregated St. Stephen's School. Graduated from St. Stephen's School in 1965. John Walker had an influence on both of these men. He was at, as you know, he was at St. Paul's in Concord, New Hampshire, where he was deemed a master. I assume that was shorthand for chaplain.
I'm sorry?
Master.
No.
It wasn't?
He was actually a history teacher.
Okay.
He was a priest. So all priests were chaplains.
I get it. Okay. And in 1966, he became canon of the Washington National Cathedral. John Walker cut a wide swath in the city. Consider his service on boards. And this is just a sample. The Council of Churches of Greater Washington. The Ecumenical Cabinet, which is a meeting of the Protestant heads. A founder of AfriCare. He was chair of the Black Student Fund, which was an organization that supported black students who were to be enrolled in independent schools, private schools. He served on the D.C. Commission on Judicial Disabilities and Tenure, on the Police Chiefs Advisory Council. He was delegate to the Assembly of the World Council of Churches in Nairobi, Kenya in 1975, and he was chair of the Absalom Jones Theological Institute. He has served on the board of Virginia Theological Seminary, and he held honorary degrees or the equivalent from many places, including the University of Pennsylvania and the equivalent of an honorary degree at the U.S. Naval Academy and the U.S. Army War College. As we know, during his tenure, the Episcopal Diocese of Washington was at the forefront of social and political change. Civil rights, Vietnam, moral change that embraced birth control, a woman's right to choose, the sexual revolution, drugs, crime, mass incarceration, and South African apartheid. He was committed to abolishing apartheid in South Africa. And we have in the archives, is replete with photographs of him demonstrating in front of the South African embassy here in Washington. He was determined that the apartheid regime be replaced with a democratically elected government. And in so doing, he cherished a friendship with the then Bishop of Johannesburg, who then became the Archbishop of Cape Town. His name was Desmond Tutu. It was during those years when it could have been easy and acceptable for mainline clergy to remain silent in the midst of all this change. John Walker was not going to stay silent, and he did not stay silent. We were treated, provoked, inspired by his prophetic voice and witness to align this church with those movements that would bring us closer to the beloved community, which in those days we would call the brotherhood of mankind. I ask rhetorically, what have we learned from his prophetic witness that would inform our leaders and us today in these fraught times? There's a story that I like to share about the cathedral when John Walker was canon there. And it was in 1968, on the 31st of March, Sunday morning, in 1968, Martin Luther King preached a sermon from the Canterbury pulpit. And he talked about Rip Van Winkle and sleeping through the revolution. That was to be his final sermon. Because remember, on April 4th, he was assassinated, and America's cities went up in flames. He was there in that pulpit at John Walker's invitation. It was the day after that sermon that Lyndon Johnson decided that he would not run again. And he thought when he withdrew from the presidential race that he could then get his Great Society programs enacted in Congress. It was not to be, because America's cities were up in flames. John Walker invited Martin Luther King to be in that pulpit that morning when others would not have done so. That, among other things, is part of his legacy. I turn now to the two gentlemen sitting here. Tony, let me start with you. You broke barriers. Did you feel an added social responsibility?
Did I feel an added
responsibility?
Social responsibility? No, I felt like I was going to school. When I went to the school that I went to, when I went to it first, Riley, you probably remember that just because of the curious situation that the United States was in the middle and early 60s, that Northern Virginia was in the situation where the public school system was undergoing its own form of reorganization, and strangely enough, even the Episcopal Church in the Diocese of Virginia had to do the same thing. And that's why when I was an 8th grader and had gone to a desegregated school, the only one in Northern Virginia, all up until the point that, up until that particular point in history, that, and I was getting ready to go off to the next school that I was to go to, that the question came about where I would go, and there were two possibilities really that really appealed to me. One,
Tony, can you use them?
oh, I'm sorry, does this help? Is this better? Oh, good, I'm sorry, I forget about using my microphone. One, because of the fact that it was a place that was, had a long and noble musical tradition, and that's the Cathedral School. And then there was St. Stephen's, Alexandria, which was in more or less in my backyard, and the choice was given to me as to which one I wanted to go to. And I said I wanted to go to St. Albans, and but there were people in Northern Virginia, in the Episcopal Church, that said that it was time for the Episcopal Church in Northern Virginia to be honest about its own Christian responsibility, and therefore that I'd go to St. Stephen's. So for me, it was, as I said, it was just a matter of going to school. It was a larger matter for some other people, and that's how I ended up at St. Stephen's, and was there for 4 years. You're right, Riley. I got there as the only African American student, and I left there as the only African American student. And it was several years between then and when the next person came along at St. Stephen's that studied at that school before I went on off to Connecticut. For the 4 years that I was there, my main concern was to go to school.
Yeah.
And just this one small, very, very small picture or piece of this puzzle was that my mother and my father went out to St. Stephen's to talk to the headmaster of the school and some other people at the school, and they got there, and not the headmaster, somebody else, sort of says, "Now your son, does he play baseball?" And my mother and father said no. Well, does he play football? No. Does he play basketball? And the answer was no. And my father said, he reads books. And that's what I did for those 4 years when I was a high school student. I read books.
You know, you were even more pioneering in this area. Episcopal High School did not accept its first black student until 1965.
That's correct. Graduated. That's correct. It was either after I graduated or before, or not long after I graduated before it did. But St. Stephen's, because of a remarkable series of coincidences, including an extremely courageous headmaster who really put himself on the line, that St. Stephen's made that decision and followed its own conscience to move to desegregate the school. And that was during this time also. I mean, I got into St. Stephen's in 1961. My diploma is in my bedroom down at Goodman House right now, and on the other side of it is the article from out of the Washington Post, and the first line in it said St. Stephen's School accepted its first Negro student as quietly as possible. And that was because of the fact, among other things, that there was at least one senator from Mississippi whose son was also a student.
Was that Jim Easton?
It was Senator Easton. And his son was at the school at the same time that I was there. So no, I didn't really think about it that much. I had other things to worry about.
Well, and you mentioned in Virginia what was happening. As you know, the 1954 Brown decision.
Yes.
And that was the year I started public education in Richmond. Did not desegregate those schools until the 1970s.
Yes.
There was something called massive resistance.
Massive resistance. That's right.
That was put there in place by James Jackson Kilpatrick, who you may remember sometime later became the venerable and venerated counterpoint person with Shane Alexander at the end of 60 Minutes on Sunday evenings. Preston,
Yes.
you knew John Walker well.
Yep.
Can you talk about your relationship with John Walker?
I met John Walker in 1974. In 1974, May, when I went up to St. Paul's School to interview for a position as a religion teacher. I was in my last year of seminary, and I had been sent from St. George's School, where I had my first interview as chaplain, but they wanted a chaplain who had some experience, and I had no experience whatsoever. I was still in seminary and had an ocean behind my ears. So I went up to St. Paul's the next weekend, and it was trustee weekend. It turns out that when I flew in to Boston from Rochester, New York, they sent the car for, I thought for me, but it was actually for John Walker, because he was going out for trustee weekend. And I hopped in the car with him, and that was the first time I met him. So I rode up with John Walker. I rode back down with Maria and Carly, I think it was. And that was the beginning of a 40, 50-year relationship between the Hannibals and the Walkers. I went through my interview, and the assistant head of school said, well, we'll contact you sometime in the next week or two. I received a call at 8 o'clock Monday morning after my interview, asking me if I wanted the job as a religion teacher, and I was actually the baby chaplain. I was a deacon, number one. There were four other chaplains, four other priests that taught a variety of subjects. But the common denominator was that we all were priests or deacons, and we all took our turn in chapel. I was there for 12 years, and I have told everybody from day one that the reason I got the job was John Walker. He had a conversation with the head of school, and that started me on my career in academic ministry. When I married my late wife, Sandy, and we had our kids, Sandy's mom lived in D.C., and we would stay with the Walkers because Lily B., as we called her, didn't have room in her apartment for all of us. So we stayed with the Walkers for years when we came down for Christmas and for Easter and when school was out. And I spent, well, Sandy and I, Maria and John, spent many an evening at either our house or at their house, just sitting and talking. And that led to me talking with him about what was next after St. Paul. And there was an opening at St. Albans for a chaplain. And I I said, I told him I was going to apply for the job. He said, don't do it, you're not going to pay enough. So I stayed at St. Paul's for a couple more years and ended up down with Peter Gomes at Harvard, which John was thrilled with.
Did he have anything to do with your mentoring, fostering the relationship between you and Peter Gomes?
Probably, but he never said he did. By that time, I had met Peter a couple of times because he had come up to St. Paul's to preach, and Peter and I had a conversation, and he was looking for an associate at Mem Church. One of the funniest things about that is that I went through the interview process. And my first Sunday at Mem Church, Memorial Church, I walked out. Before I walked out, Peter had this smile on his face, this devilish smile that he got sometimes. And I didn't know what was going on. Sandy says that when Peter walked out and then I followed him out to the altar, there was a gasp in the congregation. He hadn't told anybody that I was black. And the only people who knew were 2 or 3 people who were on the committee.
Oops.
So Sandy said there was this audible gasp. So we went on from there. But all along the while, John and Maria were nothing but supportive of the Hannibals. John and Maria are the godparents of our youngest, Alexandra, and John baptized Alex in the Little Chapel at St. Paul's.
You once described your relationship as being that of parents and son.
Yeah, I mean, I said that I was lucky to have 2 mentors, 2 fathers in God. One was my father, who was an Episcopal priest in Los Angeles. So I had an East Coast and a West Coast. The West Coast was my dad, and the East Coast was John. And I could call either one of them at any hour of the day to talk. And there were a lot of conversations. We had a lot of conversations, which led to, by the grace of God and the Holy Spirit, led us to D.C. and the founding of the Bishop.
Tony, when you got to VTS, John Walker had been here.
Yes.
Not by many years.
No.
Right. How did that affect you? There weren't a number of black students that came between you. I mean, some, but not an appreciable number. What effect did that have on you?
The enrollment situation was something of a sine curve. That is, there were times when there were a fair number of very substantial and influential African American, at that point, men who studied at the Virginia Theological Seminary, and then there were times when things were when there were the lean years. And when I arrived as one of 3 of us. Our names are out on that walkway there, or where near the chapel. We're all clustered together. Sadly, I'm the only one of us who's still around. But there were 3 of us who entered the seminary the year that I came, with a brand new dean. The memory of Bishop Walker was alive and well here, even with the fact that there were no other African American students who were here. And when I arrived, he was Canon Walker. That's how I knew him during the first years of my studying. And he was at the cathedral, and he was on television. And I had never seen someone quite like him before. In my growing up, I was one of those people who went to seminary directly out of college, so I was 21 years old. And there weren't that many places in the United States where you could see, listen to, learn from, talk to a cathedral canon who happened to be black. And that's who Bishop Walker was at that point, Canon Walker. That was a crucial part of his influence for me, because it said something about what could be achieved by a young black, at that point just men, in the Episcopal Church, in terms of influence and a particular type of influence that could manifest itself in all corners of the church, pastoral, political, in my case scholarly, that where those particular areas hadn't been, may not have been touched into quite as much. This was right after the time when I started seminary, right after the time of the special convention that took place in South Bend, Indiana, when the Episcopal Church began to sort of shake on its pivots just a little bit. And then here is Canon Walker, who was doing things, in many cases, rather behind the scenes and quietly, making use of his own position and influence with people, substantial people in the Washington metropolitan area, whom he had known because of his connections with your school, with St. Paul's. And he was, he modeled this. I think this was an important thing. So yes, he was not on this campus all that often, but his influence was known. And the rest of the story, really, I suppose, would be the bits and pieces that came up as he moved from being a canon of the cathedral to being the suffragan bishop, because at that point, that was the pattern of movement for a person, especially for minority people, if they were going to be eventually diocesan bishops of the Episcopal Church in the United States. It wasn't until much later that people were being elected directly as the bishop of this place or that place. They would be sort of go to become a suffragan bishop. It's like a beauty show. And then after X number of years of service, then they might be elected to be a diocesan bishop. But his predecessor at the National Cathedral, Bishop Burgess, John Melville Burgess, had also been at the National Cathedral at the time, and then went to be suffragan bishop of Massachusetts, and then after that was elected to be the bishop of Massachusetts. I mean, it wasn't until quite later that directly electing somebody to be the bishop of a diocese, if there were a person of color, would take place.
John Walker was plugged in Washington.
Oh yeah, you better believe it.
He had the capacity to make official Washington, social Washington, old Washington, white and black, feel comfort and inspired by him. You say that he was not here on the campus often. John Walker has never been from this campus, never been off this campus since he walked on campus. You know, he lives here, still lives here, by virtue of the fact that we're having him here today. Preston?
Yes, yes.
Don't worry.
No one's going to ask.
We have a time in this country, and I think during those times, you can probably say that they were comparable times when John Walker was in his plugged-in position to what is happening today.
Yeah, yes.
Although certainly in those days, official Washington was not as destructive as it is today. Does John Walker have a legacy with respect to how clergy should react today?
It's a different time, but I think probably yes. It's not an easy question to answer, but I would say that the answer is yes. I mean, the model that he left for us, the legacy that he leaves for us, is that he worked both sides of the street. He was first and foremost a pastor. And being a pastor meant that he, the cliche, speaking truth to power, he was able to do that in a way that was insightful, was focused, but it wasn't threatening. And ever. That's something that has to be learned. And I think he was able to do it because he was comfortable in his own skin. He was a child of God. He knew whose he was and where he came from. And he was able to, let me back up. I think that, well, I say it's hard to answer because he had the privilege of being in a seat of power right from the beginning. Well, he was a parish priest for a bit, but Matt Warren called him to be the first African-American teacher at St. Paul's, the second African-American teacher in all of New England prep schools. Wow. So he would, and St. Stephen's, St. Agnes, Episcopal, St. Paul, St. Gravel Sex, they all are what they have always been. And that is training grounds for the people who run this country. No question about it. So when he came to D.C., as has been mentioned before, he knew everybody where the bodies were buried, and he was sure of who he was and what he was about. And he was able to look, I think Bishop Gale mentioned it. You know, he walked with kings and princes and queens and heads of state. He actually did. And he was able to be, first and foremost, a pastor. And that was really, really important. So what can be learned from that? No matter what the station in life of today's clergy, those people coming out of seminary now, to be sure of who they are and what they're about, and to be first and foremost a pastor. Because that's what he was. He was also a scholar priest. He actually knew stuff. He was stupid smart. But he never flaunted that. I remember getting up early at the Walkers on 34th Street. And he would be at the dining room table either writing letters or in the living room reading at like 6 o'clock in the morning. And he had probably been out a couple hours before that. Maria said he was. So he was on top of everything. One of the things that I think I've been a priest for 50 years, and like Tony, and one of the things that I think we get caught in is forgetting how to study, forgetting how to not only read contemporary literature, but read the Bible and actually know what's in the Bible and know how that informs our ministry. He knew how to read a Bible. He knew how to interpret that in a way that got to the base of what people wanted, what people needed. And I think that's very, very important. So, I think that's the legacy. To not forget that we are built as Episcopalians to be intellectual in a positive way. We're built to be pastoral, and we're built to share that with the world that we were meant to minister. That's one of the things it is to be an Episcopal priest. And, like Jane, faith without works is dead. You can't have one without the other. That's what he taught me.
On something that Preston said, I think that this idea of somebody for whom the heart of a pastor is clear and beating is one of the things that he brought to his presence and ministry, that all of us who knew him, whether it was for a short period of time, have always benefited from greatly. I mean, the times when at the cathedral, because this was something that wasn't necessarily talked about in a loud way, but in a quiet way, when the bishop encountered people who were really in need, and to whom he responded to them was care. That's the word, care, and gentleness, and respect. That legacy is something that it was never something that I think anyone who knew anything about him would ever forget. I mean, it is not a mistake in my mind that on the day that he was buried, when they moved his ashes, that Copeland's Fanfare for the Common Man was played. And I was there because I think I was teaching here when the bishop died, and all of us from the faculty went over to it. And I heard those sort of first bits of this being played, and I was standing in the nave, and I just wept, because I knew that piece crystallized what he brought to the work of being a priest, a bishop, and a human being. And it was something of him that marked the way that he that he was able to move. and to carry out his ministry. So, yes, I mean, this was an unusual person.
I'd like to open it up for questions. Anybody has any questions? Bill?
Yes, thank you very much. One aspect of Bishop Walker, which was not mentioned, was his relationship with youth. I shared a story earlier with Preston and with Mrs. One aspect of Bishop Walker I think we have to address is his relationship with youth. And a story I shared with Reverend Hannibal and with Mrs. Walker just recently was some years ago, I was a member at St. Mark's Church. And the bishop was coming. And the bishop's coming, we all got excited. And everything gets cleaned up, the music is rehearsed. And my son was with us, he was 5 years old. And in comes the procession. And in comes Bishop Walker with his mitre, his hat. And he obviously stood out from all others. He was black. And my son wouldn't keep his eyes off of him. At the end of the service, I looked around to see my son. He was gone. And he was sitting on the steps with Bishop Walker at the cathedral. And I went up to take him away. Bishop Walker said, "No, shoot," to me. But I couldn't stand by that far. I wanted to catch the conversation. And my son asked Bishop Walker if he was God. And then Bishop Walker said, "Why do you think I'm God?" And they had this wonderful conversation. It was special. I'll never forget it, nor will my son. But it said a lot about the man. That's where he was.
One of the things that I talked about that story is that the place that he loved to go was Beauvoir, the elementary school at the cathedral. He was the first chaplain of Beauvoir. As canon, and he kept it as bishop because he learned from the kids. Quite frankly, they relaxed him with all the foolishness that goes on in the diocese, and he was able to. I worked in the diocese, I know, and he was able to learn from them as they learned from him. And finally, there were people in their 40s and 50s who were at Beauvoir when he was bishop, who still remember him and remember those times. That's the impact that you're talking about.
Isn't there a famous picture of him in
yes.
one of the chapels at the cathedral with all of these small children sitting around with him, and him being on the stairs with them?
Good afternoon. My question is regarding the toll that the PB's race took on him, especially coming out of, depending on the side you were on, a brutal PB's race last year. What was the toll, since he came so very close, and what kind of church, which is your prophetic imagination, what kind of church would we be today if he had won?
What year?
That was 1985.
That's a loaded question, but it's an important question because he should have been the first African American presiding bishop, no question about that. But in the later hours of the election, it is reported, and it's probably pretty accurate, that retired Southern bishops formed a bloc to vote against him. And now I don't know if he withdrew or if he lost. Or if he lost? He lost. He lost by 10 votes. Correct. I have my cue cards in front of me. He lost by 10 votes. But those 10 votes came from retired Southern bishops who did not want an African American to be elected bishop. Now, what would have happened if he had been elected? God only knows, but I think the church would be in a very different place than it is now. Because he opened doors for all of us. And that would have been a door that would have opened 30 years ahead of him.
A lot of nodding in the room. Nodding in agreement.
About Beauvoir, there's a fascinating note in one of the documents you've got displayed about having to call attention to the school's attention to a white child telling a black child, you can't come to my birthday party because I'm white and you're black. And he was going to deal with that, among other things, in his remarks to the school on that day. I appreciate you putting out documents like that. But to the two who have memories, can you help me? 2 stories that I don't know, and I want to know if you have them. John Walker as teacher at Bishop Tucker College, Bukono, Uganda. Does anybody remember what that experience was for him? And the other one is John Walker as student here, having insomnia at the same time Albert Mulligan was having insomnia, and their talks in the middle of the night. Just go back to you.
Rich, I can't say anything about the conversations that they had at night. All I know is that the bishop had a particular fondness for Dr. Mulligan, who was, if I remember correctly, from Mississippi.
Yes.
And but as you perhaps remember as I do, Molly was a person who had come to some decisions himself about the whole question of justice. I mean, he taught us ethics at some point along the line.
Sure did.
And so he'd come to some decisions about ethical principles for Christian behavior that informed his life, that were well planted in him, and that he used to guide his teaching, and that he was able to use in conversation with the bishop while he was here as a student. So I believe, now this is not something that I ever heard the bishop say out loud, I believe the bishop found somebody that he could talk to. And that's usually that's the way that you get things to either heal or to change. And it means that even in what he no doubt encountered when he came here as a student, because Virginia Seminary was not a pristine place when he came and broke the color barrier here. And he was here as a student with a group of people who, in being here, came from all over everywhere with the whole spectrum of attitudes that would be found in a place like this. Having friends, or having somebody who was a friend at court, was not a bad thing to have. So I'm imagining that was something that he found as a gift. I mean, others of us who, way after Bishop Walker had been here, who sometimes needed to go and talk to somebody, would find Molly as that type of person.
Thank you.
And I imagine that was so, and that was, if the bishop graduated from here in 54, and you and I graduated from here in 72, that was still part of a long time when having that type of person around is good. Sure.
No question. Nan Pete.
Uganda?
I can't answer about Uganda. I think Maria probably can, but I can't answer about Uganda. But I can say that his love affair with Africa started as a result of him reading "Cry the Beloved Country."
Could you say that again?
That his love affair with with Africa, with the continent in general, and Uganda and South Africa specifically, had to do with his reading when he was in college, I believe, of "Cry the Beloved Country" by Alan Paton. And he's said that over and over and over again, that started him on his journey with Africa.
First a novel and then doing some teaching.
Yes, yeah, and Michelle.
Dr. Jones, from after this, we will start showing the Prophecy Fulfilled in Me video that Bishop Walker's son did at his memorial. We'll be showing that in the library, and in it is a small section where Bishop Walker actually speaks about teaching in Uganda. So in that video, he can...
It's in the library.
Bishop Walker will actually answer your question.
Thank you.
Reverend Pete.
Totally off the subject. I mean, it's on Bishop Walker, but not as an academic, but as a human being, as someone who in 1988 in Lambeth, Canterbury, England, I had been invited to address the bishops as the first ordained woman to do so, but that's not the point. But the day of the speech, I was in the dining room having lunch, and Bishop Donovan was there, and some other bishops, and Bishop Walker came up and said to Herb Donovan, "Have you seen Nan Pete? Have you seen Nan?" He said, "She's right here." And he turned and he said, "I feel like the father of the bride." I'm so excited that, and Ed Browning had given him a copy of my speech, and he was so excited to be there and excited for me. So that's another side of Bishop Walker, that he was very engaging and cared about all of us.
Thank you for sharing. Last question.
One of my memories of his funeral is someone reading Robert Frost's The Road Not Taken. I don't remember who read it, but as it got to those famous last two lines, that I took the one less traveled by, and that made all the difference. I realized I was so grateful for what he had chosen in his life. And I feel like one of the pieces of his legacy is that affected each of you to make those same kinds of choices. And I'm grateful for your decisions to take the road less traveled.
Thank you very much for coming out to this discussion. And we'll be around. And these two guys, of course, will be there to answer your questions. And Maria, I hope you don't mind if people corner you. Thank you very much.
Dr. Thompson.
Joseph Thompson, you need to say something. This is our librarian.
Hello, everybody. I'm not exactly sure what I'm supposed to be saying now, but I think maybe it might have something to do with lunch.
That's exactly right.
Because, okay, thank you. I imagine everybody has developed an appetite. First of all, can I just say what an extraordinary gift this panel has. And thank you to everyone who participated in the worship this morning, which was amazing. Thank you to Bishop Harris for an amazing sermon. And thank you to all of you for coming out here today. We hope you'll come back at 3 o'clock for Bishop Baxter's keynote address. And please do go over to the refectory for lunch.